Hello, Mark. I'm Jennifer from the Sophomore Speaking and Listening class, and my student number is 7. Today I'll be reading The 4 Fish We're Overeating and What to Eat Instead by Paul Greenberg. So when I was a kid, this was my team. Laughter. I stunk at sports. I didn't like to play them. I didn't like to watch them. So this is what I did. I went fishing. And for all of my growing up, I fished on the shores of Connecticut. And these are the creatures that I saw on a regular basis. But after I grew up and went to college, and I came home in the early 90s, this is what I found. My team had shrunk. It was like literally having your roster devastated. And as I sort of looked into that, from a very personal point of view as a fisherman, I started to kind of figure out, what was the rest of the world thinking about it. First place I started to look was for fish markets, and when I went to fish markets, in spite of where I was, whether I was in North California or Paris or London or whatever, I kept seeing this weirdly repeating trope of 4 creatures again and again. On the menus, on ice, shrimp, tuna, salmon, and cod. And I thought this was pretty strange, and as I looked at it, I was wondering, did anyone else notice this sort of shrinking of the market? Well, when I looked into it, I realized that people didn't look at it as their team. Ordinary people, the way they looked at seafood was like this. It's not an unusual human characteristic to reduce the natural world down to every few elements. We did it before, 10,000 years ago when we came out of our caves. If you look at fire pits from 10,000 years ago, you'll see raccoons, you'll see wolves, you'll see all kinds of different creatures. But if you telescope to the age of, 2,000 years ago, you'll see these 4 mammals: pigs, cows, sheep, and goats. It's true of birds too. You look at the menus in New York City restaurants 150 years ago, 200 years ago. You'll see snipe, woodcock, grouse, dozens of ducks, dozens of geese. But telescope ahead to the age of modern and animal husbandry, and you'll see 4 turkeys, ducks, chicken, and geese. So it makes sense that we've headed in this direction, but how have we headed in this direction? Well, first, it's a very, very new problem. This is the way we've been fishing the oceans over the last 50 years. World War II was a tremendous incentive to arm ourselves in a war against fish. All of the technology that we perfected during World War II, sonar, lightweight polymers, all these things were redirected towards fish. And so you see this tremendous buildup in fish capacity quadrupling in the course of time from the end of World War II to the present time. And right now that means we're taking between 80 and 90 million metric tons out of the sea every year. This is the equivalent of the human weight of China taken out of the sea every year. And it's no coincidence that I use China as the example because China is now the largest fishing nation in the world. Well, that's only half the story. The other half of the story is the incredible boom in fish farming and aquaculture, which is now only in the last year or two starting to exceed the amount of wild fish that we produce. So that if you add wild fish and farm fish together, you'll get the equivalent of 2 Chinas created from the ocean each and every year. And again, it's not a coincidence that I use China as an example because China, in addition to being the biggest catcher of fish, is also the biggest farmer of fish. So let's look though at the 4 choices we're making right now. The first one, by far the most consumed seafood in America and in which of the West, is shrimp. Shrimp in the wild as a wild product is a terrible product. 5, 10, 15 pounds of wild fish are regularly killed to bring 1 pound of shrimp to the market. They're also incredibly fuel inefficient to bring to the market. In a recent study that was produced out of the Dalhousie University, it was found that dragging for shrimp is one of the most intensive way of fishing that you can find. So you can farm them, and people do farm them, and they farm them a lot in this very area. Problem is the place where you farm shrimp is in these wild habitats, in mangroves forests. Now look at those lovely roots coming down. Those are the things that hold soil together, protect coast, create habitats for all sorts of young fish, young shrimp, all sorts of things that are important to this environment. Well, this is what happens to a lot of coastal mangrove forests. We've lost millions of acres of coastal mangroves over the last 30 or 40 years. That rate of destruction has slowed, but we're still in a major mangrove deficit. The other thing that's going on here is a phenomenon that the filmmaker Mark Benjamin called grinding Nemo. This phenomenon is very, very relevant to anything that you've ever seen on the tropical reef, because what's going on right now, we have shrimp draggers dragging for shrimp, catching a huge amount of bycatch. That bycatch in turn gets ground up and turned into shrimp food. And sometimes many of these vessels manned by slaves are catching these so-called trash fish that we would love to see on a reef, grinding them up and turning them into shrimp feed, an ecosystem literally eating itself and spitting out shrimp. The next most consumed seafood in America and also throughout the West is tuna. So tuna is the ultimate global fish. These huge management areas have to be observed in order for tuna to be well managed. Our own management area, called the Regional Fisheries Management Organization, is called ICCAT. The International Commission for the Conservation of Atlantic Tunas. The great naturalist Carl Safina once called it the international conspiracy to catch all the tunas. Of course, we've seen incredible improvement in ICCAT in the last few years. There is total room for improvement, but it remains to be said that tuna is a global fish, and to manage it, we have to manage the globe. Well, we could also try to grow tuna, but tuna is a spectacularly bad animal for aquaculture. Many people don't know this about tuna are warm-blooded. They can heat their body 20 degrees above ambient temperature. They can swim at over 40 miles an hour. So that pretty much eliminates all the advantages of farming a fish, right? A farm fish is cold-blooded. It doesn't move too much. That's a great thing for growing protein. But if you got this crazy wild creature that swims at 40 miles an hour and heats its blood, not a great candidate for aquaculture. The next creature most consumed seafood in America and throughout the West is salmon. Now, salmon got its plundering too, but it didn't really necessarily happen through fishing. This is my home state of Connecticut. Connecticut used to be the home to a lot of wild salmon, but if you look at this map of Connecticut, every dot on the map is a dam. There are over 3,000 dams in the state of Connecticut. I often say this is why people in Connecticut are so uptight. Laughter. If somebody could just unblock Connecticut, I feel that we could have an infinitely better world, but I made this particular comment at a convention once of National Parks officers, and this guy from North Carolina sidled up to me. He says, you ought to be so hard on your Connecticut, because we are here in North Carolina. We got 35,000 dams. So it's a national epidemic. It's an international epidemic. And there are dams everywhere, and these are precisely the things that stop wild salmon from reaching their spawning grounds. So as a result, we've turned to aquaculture, and salmon is one of the most successful, at least from a numbers of point of view. When they first started farming salmon, it could take as many as 6 pounds of wild fish to make a single pound of salmon. The industry has, to its credit, greatly improved. They've gotten it below 2 to 1, although it's little bit of a cheap, because if you look at the way aquaculture feed is produced, they are measuring pellets, pounds of pellets per pound of salmon. Those pellets are in turn reduced fish. So the actual what's called the FIFO, the fish in and the fish out, they're kind of hard to say, but in any case, credit to the industry, it has lowered the amount of fish per pound of salmon. Problem is we've also gone crazy with the amount of salmon that we're producing. Aquaculture is the fastest growing food system on the planet. It's growing in something like 7% per year, and so even we're doing less per fish to bring it to the market, we're still killing a lot of these little fish. And it's not just fish that we're feeding fish to. We are also feeding fish to chickens and pigs. So we've got chickens and they're eating fish, but rarely we also have fish that are eating chickens. Because the byproducts of chicken, feathers, blood, bone, get ground up and fed to fish. So I often wondered, is there a fish that ate a chicken that ate a fish? It's sort of a reworking of this chicken and egg thing. Anyway, laughter. Altogether, though, it results in a terrible mess. What you are talking about is something between 20 and 30 million metric tons of wild creatures that are taken from the ocean and used and ground up. That's the equivalent of a third of China, or of an entire United States of humans that's taken out of the sea each and every year. The last of the four is a kind of amorphous thing. It's what the industry calls whitefish. There are many fish that get cycled into the whitefish thing, but the way to kind of tell the story, I think, is through that classic piece of American culinary innovation, the fillet-o fish sandwich. So the fillet-o fish sandwich actually started as halibut. And it started because a local franchise owner found that when he serves his McDonald's on Friday, nobody came. Because it was a Catholic community, they needed fish, so he went to Ray Cork and he said, "I'm going to bring you a fish sandwich going to be made out of halibut." Ray Cork said, "I don't think it's going to work. I want to do a hola burger, and there's going to be a slice of pineapple on the bun. But let's do this. Let's have a bet. Whoever sandwich sells more, that will be the winning sandwich." Well, it's kind of sad for the ocean that a hula burger didn't win. So he made his halibut sandwich. Unfortunately, though, the sandwich came in at 30 cents. Ray wanted the sandwich to come in at 25 cents, so he turned to Atlantic Coast. We all know what happened to Atlantic Coast in New England. So now the fillet-o fish sandwich is made out of Alaska pollock. It's the largest finfish fishery in the United States. 2 to 3 billion pounds of fish taken out of the sea every single year. If we go through the pollock